Do you think people notice those who quietly shape their lives, the ones who are always there, working tirelessly in the background, often without recognition? A grand wedding, the kind you see in magazines. Glittering chandeliers hang from high ceilings, the scent of exotic flowers fills the air, and every guest is dressed in designer clothes, sipping champagne like it's water. The bride, Sophia, is the epitome of success. An accomplished millionaire who overcame everything life threw at her to rise to the top. It's her day, her moment. But then something happens that no one in the room could have predicted. In the far corner of the room, standing quietly, is Maria, Sophia's maid. She looks so out of place, wearing a simple dress among the glamorous crowd. She's nervous, keeping her gaze low, as if trying not to be noticed. Most people wouldn't even glance her way. But when Sophie steps forward to speak, the entire room shifts its focus. Instead of delivering a standard wedding speech filled with love declarations and gratitude for the day, Sophia does something no one expects. Her voice shakes as she addresses the crowd, not with a story about her fiancé, but with a story about Maria. It's a story of sacrifice and loyalty, of quiet strength and selfless acts. She begins to talk about her childhood, a time when life was hard, money was scarce, and opportunities were even scarcer. In those dark days, Maria wasn't just a maid. She was a lifeline, a woman who worked tirelessly to make sure Sophia had a chance to dream, to grow, to escape the cycle of poverty. Maria didn't just clean their house or cook their meals. She gave Sophia hope. She gave her the belief that something better was possible. Sophia's words echo through the room as she recounts moments that shaped her life. Nights when Maria stayed up late sewing her school uniforms by hand, sacrificing her own comfort so Sophia could have a future. Days when Maria offered her small savings to pay for Sophia's books or school supplies. These weren't grand, showy gestures. They were quiet, humble acts of kindness that no one else saw or cared to notice. But Sophia noticed, and now she's making sure the whole world notices too. The crowd listens in stunned silence as Sophia continues. Her voice, though soft, carries an undeniable power. She's not just talking about Maria. She's reshaping the way everyone in the room sees her. Maria is no longer just the maid. She's a hero, a woman whose actions, though small and unassuming, changed the course of Sophia's life forever. But Sophia isn't done. As the audience holds its breath, she steps forward, holding a small box. When she opens it, Maria gasps. Inside are keys, not just any keys, but the keys to a house. A place Maria can finally call her own, after years of sacrificing everything for others. Sophia's voice breaks as she says, "This is for you, Maria. You've spent your life taking care of others. Now it's time for someone to take care of you." The room erupts in applause, but Maria can barely move. Tears stream down her face as she whispers, "I don't deserve this." But Sophia shakes her head and replies, "You deserve this and so much more. Everything I've done, everything I've become, is because of you." It's a moment that leaves everyone speechless, not because of the wealth or the grandeur of the wedding, but because of the raw humanity, the gratitude, the love that filled the room. In that instant, the wedding transforms from a celebration of two people to a celebration of something far greater. The power of kindness, loyalty, and recognizing the unsung heroes in our lives. Sophia's journey from poverty to success was not the kind of tale you hear often, but the kind that grips your heart and refuses to let go. She was born into circumstances that many would describe as hopeless. A small, run-down home on the outskirts of a forgotten village, where dreams were luxuries and survival was the priority. Her parents worked tirelessly to keep the family afloat. Her father labored long hours in a factory, his hands calloused and stained with grease, while her mother cleaned houses, often returning home too exhausted to speak. Sophia grew up understanding sacrifice, watching the silent struggle of her parents and feeling the weight of their unspoken hope that she might one day escape the life that had trapped them. Even as a child, Sophia wasn't like the others in her neighborhood. While the other children played in the dusty streets, carefree and unaware of the world's harshness, Sophia was different. She spent hours in the corner of their small, dimly lit home, poring over books borrowed from neighbors, her face illuminated by the flickering light of a candle. Education for her wasn't just a path to knowledge, it was her lifeline. Her hunger for learning was insatiable, and she approached every lesson as though it held the key to her future. But the journey wasn't without obstacles. There were days when her family couldn't afford the bus fare to school, and Sophia would walk miles under the scorching sun, her shoes worn thin and her uniform patched together with her mother's tired hands. The other students would sometimes mock her for her appearance, her poverty glaring in a classroom filled with children who had more. But Sophia didn't let their words pierce her determination. She knew she was different, and she was willing to endure anything to prove that her circumstances didn't define her worth. Her big break came in the form of a scholarship. It wasn't handed to her on a silver platter. It was earned through countless sleepless nights, her fingers aching from writing essays, solving equations, and crafting projects with limited resources. When she received the acceptance letter to a prestigious university, she didn't cry tears of joy. She wept from relief. It was her ticket out, her proof that hard work could open doors even for someone like her. But as she thought the hardest part was over, she was wrong. The university was a world apart from her little village. The students were polished, confident, and well-connected. They spoke about vacations abroad and wore clothes that cost more than her family's monthly income. Sophia felt out of place, her insecurities threatening to overwhelm her. She didn't have the luxury of time to feel sorry for herself, though. With little money to sustain her, she worked part-time jobs while managing a full course load, often going without meals just to save a little more. She waited tables, cleaned offices, and even tutored younger students, all while maintaining her grades. The pressure was immense, but Sophia thrived under it. She knew that the only way forward was through relentless effort. Over the years, her grit paid off. She graduated at the top of her class, her name engraved on the university's honor roll, a testament to her resilience. Her first job in the corporate world wasn't glamorous, but it was her foot in the door. Sophia poured her soul into her work, often staying late to complete projects or learn skills others wouldn't bother with. She climbed the ranks slowly but surely, her reputation as a problem solver and innovator spreading throughout the industry. Eventually, she took a leap of faith and started her own business. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving behind a stable income to venture into the unknown was terrifying. But Sophia had learned by now that fear was a companion to growth. Her business started small, a modest operation run from a cramped office with a handful of employees. It wasn't the size of the company that mattered, though, it was the vision behind it. Sophia brought the same relentless drive and resourcefulness to her venture that had carried her through life so far. She understood people's struggles because she had lived them, and she built her company on the values of compassion, integrity, and hard work. Her ability to connect with clients and employees alike became her greatest strength, setting her apart in an industry that often felt impersonal and detached. Success didn't come overnight, but when it came, it was undeniable. Sophia's company grew, expanding its reach and earning her accolades as one of the most influential businesswomen in her field. Her face graced the covers of magazines, and her story became an inspiration to many. But despite her wealth and recognition, Sophia remained grounded. She didn't flaunt her success or forget the struggles that had shaped her. Instead, she used her platform to give back, funding scholarships for underprivileged students and supporting causes that aligned with her values. Through it all, one person remained a constant presence in Sophia's life: Maria, the maid who had cared for her family when they had nothing. Maria wasn't just an employee. She was a part of Sophia's story, a symbol of selflessness and quiet strength. While others might have overlooked Maria's contributions, Sophia never did. She remembered the nights when Maria stayed up with her, offering encouragement when she doubted herself, or the mornings when Maria prepared her a modest breakfast with whatever scraps were left in the kitchen. Maria didn't just clean their house, she created a sense of stability in a life that often felt chaotic. As Sophia built her empire, she made sure Maria was always cared for, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she owed her so much more. This reflection weighed heavily on Sophia's mind as she planned her wedding. She knew the event would be extravagant, her wealth and status demanded it, but she didn't want it to be just another showcase of opulence. She wanted it to mean something, to honor the people who had made her success possible. And so, as the plans came together, Sophia began to weave a secret into the fabric of her big day, a moment that would change everything, not just for her, but for Maria as well. The wedding would be a celebration of love, yes, but also a testament to the power of gratitude and the importance of recognizing the invisible heroes in our lives. This purpose, this vision, became the heart of everything Sophia did as the day drew closer. It wasn't about impressing her guests or indulging in luxury. It was about creating a moment that would transcend the material and touch the soul. And that, she knew, was the real measure of her success. Maria's story isn't one you'd read in history books or see splash across headlines, but it's the kind that quietly stays with you, reminding you of the strength it takes to live a life of service. Maria was born in a tiny village far from the bustling cities, where opportunities were as scarce as running water. She was the eldest of 5 siblings, thrust into adulthood before her time when her father passed away suddenly, leaving the family to survive on the small earnings her mother made sewing clothes for neighbors. From the moment Maria could walk, she knew what it meant to work hard. By the age of 10, she was helping her mother with sewing, learning how to stretch every penny and making sacrifices so her younger siblings wouldn't go hungry. She wasn't given the luxury of schooling beyond the basics, but Maria's intelligence was sharp, honed by life itself. She knew how to adapt, how to survive, and how to find joy even in the simplest of things. A blooming flower by the roadside, a cool breeze on a scorching day, or the sound of her siblings laughing over a shared meal. When Maria was just a teenager, she left her village to find work in the city. The decision wasn't easy, leaving behind her family and everything familiar, but she carried the weight of their needs on her shoulders. She found a position as a housemaid for a middle-class family, earning just enough to send money back home while saving a little for herself. The work was exhausting, the hours long, but Maria never complained. She poured herself into every task, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, cooking meals with love, and taking pride in doing her job well. Over time, she gained a reputation for being reliable and hardworking, traits that eventually led her to Sofia's family. When Maria first arrived at Sofia's house, she didn't know how much of an impact she would have on their lives, or how deeply they would affect hers. It wasn't an easy time for the family. Sofia's parents were juggling multiple jobs, struggling to keep the household afloat. Maria stepped in, not just as a housemaid, but as a steady presence in the chaos. She didn't see her role as just cleaning and cooking. She saw it as helping a family find a rhythm, a sense of stability in an otherwise uncertain world. Sofia was just a little girl then, wide-eyed and full of questions. Maria immediately noticed something special about her. The way she clung to her books, her endless curiosity, and the determination in her eyes. Maria didn't have much to give, but what she had, she shared freely. She became a quiet cheerleader for Sofia, encouraging her to dream big, to keep pushing forward even when the odds were stacked against her. Maria's sacrifices often went unnoticed, but they were never small. When there wasn't enough food to go around, Maria would give up her portion so Sofia could eat. When Sofia needed supplies for school, Maria would find ways to save a little extra from her wages to help out. These were the kinds of acts that didn't come with applause or recognition, but they built a foundation that allowed Sofia to thrive. Maria wasn't just doing her job. She was investing in a future she might never see, a future she believed in because of Sofia's potential. Maria didn't know much about the world outside the kitchen or the laundry room, but she knew this: helping someone else succeed was a success in itself. Over the years, Maria became more than an employee to Sofia's family. She was a part of their lives in ways that words could never fully express. When Sofia's parents were too busy working, it was Maria who stayed up with her, helping her study even though she could barely read herself. It was Maria who patched up Sofia's clothes when they tore, turning hand-me-downs into something presentable. It was Maria who comforted Sofia when she came home crying after being teased at school. And when Sofia's parents struggled to find hope in the face of mounting bills and endless work, it was Maria who reminded them, with her quiet strength, that they were doing everything they could. Maria didn't see her work as a burden. To her, it was an extension of who she was, a caregiver, a protector, someone who found purpose in making life a little easier for those around her. But life wasn't always kind to Maria. She often felt invisible, overlooked by a world that saw her only as a maid. She wasn't bitter, but there were moments when the loneliness crept in, moments when she wondered if anyone truly saw her. Still, Maria never let those thoughts linger. She believed in working hard, in doing the right thing even when no one was watching. She believed in love, not the romantic kind, but the kind that shows up in small, everyday actions, in folding laundry with care or making a child laugh after a hard day. As Sofia grew older and began to achieve the things Maria had always dreamed for her, Maria couldn't have been prouder. She watched from the sidelines as Sofia graduated, started her career, and eventually became a shining example of success. But no matter how far Sofia climbed, she never forgot Maria. She made sure Maria was cared for, ensuring she had everything she needed. Yet for Maria, it wasn't about the material support. It was about the recognition, the knowledge that Sofia saw her not just as a maid, but as someone who had played a meaningful role in her life. And that recognition, rare as it was, filled Maria with a quiet joy. When the wedding day arrived, Maria never expected to be invited, let alone honored. She came because she wanted to see Sofia happy, to witness the culmination of everything she had worked for. She didn't dress to stand out or make a statement. She came as she was, humble and unassuming. She stood at the back of the grand hall, her heart swelling with pride as she watched Sofia shine. And when Sofia began her speech, turning the attention to Maria in front of the entire crowd, it was a moment that Maria could never have imagined. She had spent her life giving without expecting anything in return. But in that moment, the spotlight was on her, not for her job, but for her heart, her sacrifices, her unwavering belief in someone else's dreams. Maria's story is one of quiet heroism, of finding purpose in helping others succeed. It's a reminder that greatness isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's found in the hands that hold you steady, the voice that whispers encouragement when you need it most, the presence that stays with you through life's hardest moments. Maria never sought recognition, but she earned something far greater, a legacy of love and an impact that would last far beyond her lifetime. As the wedding day approached, the air around Sofia was a whirlwind of anticipation and preparation, a blend of excitement and reflection that seemed to envelop everyone around her. The grand event was shaping up to be everything one might expect from a self-made millionaire's celebration of love. A historic venue adorned with cascading flowers in shades of ivory and blush, chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, and tables set with crystal glasses and fine china that spoke of luxury. The guest list was as impressive as the decor, filled with influential figures, friends from her journey to success, and family members eager to witness the culmination of her incredible story. But for Sofia, this wasn't just about a lavish party or even the promises she was about to make to the man she loved. Deep in her heart, she knew this day was an opportunity to do something meaningful, something that would reach beyond the confines of wealth and status. It was a chance to honor the people who had truly shaped her life. In the days leading up to the wedding, Sofia found herself reflecting more and more on Maria. The memories came in waves, unbidden but vivid, each one a reminder of the quiet strength and selflessness that Maria had shown throughout her life. She remembered the nights when Maria stayed up late, mending her school uniforms by hand under the dim glow of a single bulb so Sofia could walk into class with her head held high. She thought of the times when Maria had gone without so Sofia could have a little extra, an extra serving of food, an extra book for school, an extra bit of hope. Sofia had built her success on a foundation of hard work and determination, but she knew that foundation would have crumbled without Maria's unwavering support. And so, as she reviewed the seating arrangements, finalized the vows, and selected the music for the ceremony, an idea began to take shape in her mind. This wedding would not just be a celebration of her love story with Daniel. It would also be a moment to thank Maria in a way that would resonate forever. The morning of the wedding arrived, and the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The venue was transformed into a vision of elegance, with every detail meticulously arranged to perfection. Guests began to arrive, stepping out of sleek cars dressed in their finest attire, their laughter and chatter filling the air with an energy that was both festive and refined. Inside, Sofia was a picture of calm and grace as she sat in the bridal suite, her gown a masterpiece of lace and satin that seemed to glow in the sunlight streaming through the windows. But while everyone around her buzzed with excitement, discussing the grandeur of the event, Sofia's mind was elsewhere. She thought about Maria, who was likely standing quietly in the background, as she always did, ensuring everything ran smoothly without drawing attention to herself. Sofia had made sure Maria received an invitation, not as a worker, but as an honored guest. It wasn't an easy thing to convince Maria to attend. She had protested at first, saying she didn't belong in such a grand setting, that her place was behind the scenes. But Sofia had insisted, her voice firm but kind, saying, "Maria, you've spent your whole life putting others first. Today, it's about time someone put you in the spotlight." Maria had arrived early, dressed in the modest but elegant dress Sofia had gifted her. She walked into the grand hall, her eyes wide as she took in the splendor of the venue. The ceiling seemed to stretch into the heavens, adorned with intricate carvings that spoke of history and craftsmanship. Tables were adorned with floral arrangements so lush they looked like paintings, and the gentle hum of classical music played in the background, setting the perfect tone for the occasion. Maria felt out of place in this world of glitter and gold, but she reminded herself that she was here for Sofia, the little girl she had once cared for, who had grown into a woman she admired deeply. She took her seat at the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude for the invitation. Meanwhile, Sofia was preparing to walk down the aisle. Her father, standing beside her, looked at her with tears in his eyes, his pride almost palpable. "You've made us so proud, Sofia," he whispered. She smiled, but her thoughts drifted once again to Maria. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not just the vows, not just the celebration of her union with Daniel, but the chance to turn the spotlight onto someone who had given so much and asked for so little in return. As the music began to play, signaling the start of the ceremony, Sofia took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart pounding with anticipation, not for what lay ahead, but for the moment she had planned so carefully. As the guests turned to watch Sofia walk down the aisle, the room was filled with a reverent silence. She looked every bit the radiant bride, her smile bright and her steps confident. But as she moved closer to the altar, her eyes scanned the crowd, landing briefly on Maria, who sat quietly at the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and Sofia's smile softened, as though sending a silent message. Today is your day too. The ceremony unfolded beautifully, with heartfelt vows exchanged and a few light-hearted moments that drew laughter from the crowd. But as the officiant prepared to pronounce them husband and wife, Sofia raised her hand, signaling for him to pause. "Before we continue," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "there's something I need to say." The room grew still, the hum of whispers and rustling fabric fading into silence. Sofia turned to face the guests, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Today is one of the most important days of my life, but it wouldn't be complete if I didn't take a moment to honor someone who has been my rock, my guiding light, and my greatest supporter." She paused, her gaze drifting toward Maria. "Maria," she said softly, "please stand." Maria's eyes widened in shock, her cheeks flushing as every head in the room turned toward her. She hesitated, shaking her head slightly, but Sofia's warm smile gave her the courage to rise. The room erupted into whispers, a mix of curiosity and confusion. Who was this woman standing humbly in the back of the room? And why was the bride addressing her in the middle of her vows? But as Sofia began to speak, the whispers faded, replaced by a rapt silence as the story of Maria unfolded. A story of sacrifice, love, and unwavering support that had shaped Sofia's life in ways no one had known until now. As Sofia sat alone in the quiet of her room just days before her wedding, the weight of her journey bore down on her in a way she hadn't expected. The reflection staring back at her in the mirror was one of a woman who had achieved more than she ever thought possible. Her rise from poverty to wealth was nothing short of extraordinary, and the world often applauded her for it. They admired her grit, her determination, and her ability to transform her life through sheer willpower. But in the stillness of that moment, away from the adoration and accolades, Sofia felt a gnawing guilt she couldn't shake. The truth was, her story wasn't hers alone. Every milestone, every victory had been made possible by the sacrifices of someone else, Maria. And yet, how often had Sofia stopped to truly acknowledge that? As the world celebrated her achievements, Maria had remained in the background, her contributions unspoken, her sacrifices invisible. Sofia's heart ached as she thought of all the moments Maria had been there for her. When she was a scared little girl, unsure of her place in the world, it was Maria who told her she was special, who made her believe she could be more. Maria had stayed up late to sew her uniforms, given her money when she couldn't afford books, and whispered encouragements when she doubted herself. These weren't acts born of duty, they were acts of love, and Sofia had carried them with her every step of the way, even if she hadn't always realized it. But now, as she prepared to celebrate one of the most significant days of her life, Sofia couldn't help but feel the sting of guilt. How had she let so much time pass without properly thanking Maria? Yes, she had cared for her in material ways, raising her salary, making sure she was comfortable. But it wasn't enough. Sophia realized that no amount of money or comfort could ever truly repay Maria for the love and loyalty she had given so freely. The guilt wasn't just about what she hadn't done. It was about the larger picture, the way society overlooked people like Maria. Women like her, who worked tirelessly in the background, were often treated as if their lives didn't matter, as if their worth was tied solely to the tasks they performed. Sophia felt a deep sadness as she thought about how often Maria's work had been taken for granted, not just by others but by herself. And yet, alongside the guilt was an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Sophia knew that without Maria, her story would have been entirely different. It wasn't just about the material help Maria had provided. It was about the emotional support, the stability, and the belief that someone as unremarkable as a maid could make her feel like the most remarkable person in the world. Sophia's gratitude ran so deep it brought tears to her eyes. She wanted to tell Maria, to make her understand just how much she meant to her. But words felt insufficient. How do you put into words a lifetime of sacrifices, of silent love, of unwavering presence? Sophia wrestled with this question as the wedding day approached. The closer the date came, the more she felt the need to do something meaningful, something that would show Maria, and everyone else, how much she was truly worth. But there was a challenge in this. Sophia worried about how others would perceive her actions. Her wedding was supposed to be a celebration of her love for Daniel, a showcase of the life they were building together. Would it be inappropriate to shift the focus to Maria, to tell the story of someone who many of the guests would see as just a maid? Sophia knew the circles she moved in now, filled with people who valued status and appearances above all else. Would they judge her for honoring Maria in such a public way? Would they dismiss Maria's story as unimportant or irrelevant? These thoughts weighed heavily on her mind, creating a tension between her desire to express gratitude and her fear of societal judgment. But as the days passed, Sophia found her resolve growing stronger. She thought back to all the times Maria had chosen to do the right thing, even when it was difficult or thankless. Maria had never let fear or judgment stop her from caring for Sophia, and now it was Sophia's turn to do the same. She realized that her guilt wasn't just about Maria. It was about the larger issue of how people like her were treated, how their contributions were overlooked, how their lives were undervalued. Sophia wanted to change that narrative, even if only for a moment, even if only in one room filled with people. She wanted to show the world that Maria's life, her work, her love, mattered. And so Sophia made a decision. The wedding would still be about love, but it wouldn't just be about her love for Daniel. It would also be about the love and gratitude she felt for Maria, the woman who had shaped her life in ways she could never fully articulate. Sophia decided to rewrite the narrative of her wedding, to turn it into a moment that would honor Maria in the way she deserved. It wasn't an easy decision, and it came with its own set of risks, but Sophia knew it was the right one. She felt a sense of peace as she imagined the moment, the look on Maria's face when she realized she was being recognized, not just as a maid, but as a person who had made an extraordinary impact. This clarity didn't erase Sophia's guilt entirely, but it transformed it into something productive, something powerful. It reminded her that guilt, when paired with gratitude, could lead to change. And that change began with her choice to stand up and say, "Maria, I see you. I honor you. And today the world will too." In that moment, Sophia's wedding became more than a celebration. It became a tribute to the unsung heroes of the world, a declaration of the value of love and service, and a reflection of the deep bond that had shaped her life. Sophia knew it wouldn't erase the past or repay Maria's sacrifices, but it was a start, a way to say thank you in the most meaningful way she could imagine. The wedding of Sophia and Daniel wasn't just an event. It was a spectacle, the kind that people in their social circles anticipated for months. Invitations, printed on thick, embossed paper, hinted at the grandeur awaiting the attendees. The venue, a historic estate that had hosted generations of elite celebrations, was meticulously prepared to dazzle. From the moment the first guest arrived, it was clear this was no ordinary wedding. Every detail spoke of sophistication and wealth, from the towering floral arrangements to the live orchestra playing softly in the background. Guests mingled, their laughter and polite conversations filling the air, as they admired the opulence around them. These were people accustomed to luxury, people for whom extravagance was a way of life. And yet, even among them, This wedding stood out as a testament to Sophia's success and Daniel's family's legacy. The weight of societal expectations was everywhere, woven into the very fabric of the event, and Sophia felt it pressing down on her. These weren't just guests, they were spectators, critics, and in some cases, opportunists. The guest list included business magnates, socialites, and even a few notable public figures, all of whom had their own reasons for attending. Some were genuinely there to celebrate the union of two extraordinary individuals. Others, however, came out of curiosity, eager to see how Sophia, a woman who had risen from humble beginnings, would carry herself in a setting that demanded perfection. They wanted to see if she would falter, if the weight of her past would show, if she could truly belong in a world that had once seemed out of reach. For Sophia, these unspoken judgments were nothing new, but on her wedding day, they felt magnified. Every glance, every whispered comment seemed to carry a layer of scrutiny. Was her gown designer enough? Were the decorations tasteful yet extravagant? Was her family blending seamlessly into this sea of privilege, or were they standing out like guests who didn't quite belong? Among the attendees, Daniel's family held the most influence. They came from old money, their wealth stretching back generations, and they carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who had never known scarcity. Daniel's parents, in particular, were figures of authority within their social circles, admired for their philanthropy and business acumen. They had been polite and welcoming towards Sophia during the engagement, but she could sense the subtle hesitations beneath their smiles. While they admired her accomplishments, they couldn't entirely ignore her background. To them, Sophia's story of rising from poverty was inspirational, yes, but it was also a reminder of her difference, her otherness. They never said it aloud, but she could feel it in the way they spoke of the wedding, their careful suggestions about the guest list, the menu, the traditions to follow. This wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a reflection of their family's status, a performance that had to be flawless. This tension extended to Sophia's own family as well. Her parents, though proud of her, were visibly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the event. They weren't used to marble floors and crystal chandeliers, to waitstaff in pristine uniforms serving hors d'oeuvres with names they couldn't pronounce. They tried their best to blend in, but Sophia could see the uncertainty in their movements, the nervous glances exchanged between her mother and father as they navigated this unfamiliar world. It wasn't that they weren't happy for her. They were overjoyed. But they couldn't help feeling like outsiders in a place where wealth wasn't just a measure of success, but a language, a culture they didn't fully understand. Watching them, Sophia felt a pang of guilt, not because of anything they did, but because of the unspoken rules that made them feel this way. And then there was Maria. Sophia had insisted on inviting her as a guest, not as a worker, but even this simple gesture came with complications. In a room filled with designer dresses and tailored suits, Maria's modest attire stood out. She wasn't dressed poorly, Sophia had made sure of that, but she wasn't dressed in a way that matched the grandeur of the event. As Maria quietly took her seat near the back of the room, Sophia noticed how some guests glanced at her with curiosity, their expressions ranging from confusion to mild disapproval. Who was this woman, they seemed to wonder, and why was she here? Maria, ever the humble and self-effacing person, did her best to remain invisible, but Sophia saw her discomfort. It wasn't just the lavish surroundings or the presence of powerful people. It was the knowledge that she didn't belong, at least not in the way society defined belonging in a place like this. Sophia felt torn as she observed all of this. On one hand, she wanted her wedding to be perfect, to meet every expectation placed upon it. She wanted Daniel's family to see her as an equal, someone worthy of their respect and admiration. She wanted her guests to leave impressed, to talk about how stunning and seamless the event had been. But on the other hand, she couldn't ignore the truth staring her in the face. The very idea of perfection, as defined by these societal expectations, was deeply flawed. It was a perfection that left no room for people like Maria, no room for the stories of sacrifice and resilience that had shaped Sophia's life. It was a perfection that prioritized appearances over authenticity, wealth over humanity. As the ceremony drew closer, Sophia found herself grappling with an internal conflict that wouldn't go away. How could she honor Maria in a way that felt genuine and meaningful, without disrupting the delicate balance of expectations surrounding the event? How could she bring attention to the person who had done so much for her, without overshadowing the celebration of her love for Daniel? These questions circled in her mind, each one adding to the weight she already carried. But as she sat in the quiet moments before walking down the aisle, something became clear to her. This wasn't just about Maria, it was about what Maria represented. It was about all the people who go unnoticed, who work tirelessly without recognition, who are judged by their status instead of their character. It was about showing everyone in that room that worth isn't determined by wealth or appearances, but by the love and dedication a person brings to the world. Sophia took a deep breath as this realization settled within her. She knew the risks of what she was about to do. There would be people who wouldn't understand, who might even disapprove. But she also knew it was the right thing to do. The societal expectations surrounding her wedding had created a stage, and now she had the opportunity to use that stage to shine a light on something far more important than herself. This wasn't just her moment, it was Maria's moment too. And as Sophia prepared to take those first steps down the aisle, she felt a sense of calm amidst the chaos. Whatever happened next, she knew she was doing what she had always been taught to do: honor the people who had made her success possible, no matter what the world might think. As the hours ticked closer to the ceremony, Sophia found herself caught in a storm of uncertainty, her earlier determination wavering under the weight of doubt. She sat in the bridal suite, the delicate fabric of her gown flowing around her like a river of white, her hands resting uneasily in her lap. The room was filled with the quiet hum of last-minute preparations, voices of assistants confirming schedules, the faint clinking of glassware from the hall below. But none of it reached Sophia. Her mind was elsewhere, spinning with questions she couldn't shake. What if this wasn't the right time? What if her plan to honor Maria turned out to be a mistake? What if, in trying to shine a light on someone else, she dimmed the significance of the day she had worked so hard to create? The questions pressed on her, heavier with each passing moment, and for the first time, she felt her resolve falter. It wasn't that Sophia doubted Maria's worth. She could never question that. But the complexities of the situation made her second-guess everything. She thought about the guests filling the grand hall below, a sea of polished faces and sharp gazes, each carrying their own silent judgments. This wasn't an audience that celebrated vulnerability or imperfection. This was a group that thrived on appearances, on the unspoken competition of who could project the most success, the most grace, the most control. In a room like that, would they even understand the importance of Maria's story? Would they see the depth of her sacrifices, or would they dismiss her as just another worker in the background of a successful life? Sophia's chest tightened at the thought of those judgmental whispers, of people twisting Maria's story into something it wasn't. She didn't want Maria to be seen as a token gesture, or worse, pitied. The fear of inadvertently diminishing Maria's dignity was enough to make Sophia hesitate. Her mind then shifted to Daniel's family, whose presence added another layer of complexity. They were kind, polite, even welcoming, but Sophia had always felt a certain distance between them and herself. A subtle but palpable awareness of the differences in their upbringings. They had never explicitly questioned her background, but she knew it was something they noticed, something that quietly set her apart. Now, as she prepared to turn a spotlight on Maria, Sophia wondered how they would react. Would they see her gesture as a heartfelt acknowledgement of someone who had shaped her life? Or would they perceive it as an inappropriate distraction from the purpose of the day, a deviation from the carefully curated image of perfection the wedding was meant to project? The idea of Daniel's parents exchanging uneasy glances, of their poised smiles faltering ever so slightly, made Sophia's stomach churn. She had worked so hard to earn their respect, to prove that she belonged in their world. What if this moment undid all of that? Sophia's doubt wasn't confined to the judgment of others, it extended to herself. She couldn't help but question whether her intentions, no matter how pure, would translate the way she hoped. Was she trying to honor Maria, or was she trying to ease her own guilt? The thought was a painful one, but she couldn't ignore it. She didn't want her gesture to come across as performative, as though she was using Maria's story to elevate her own narrative. Maria deserved more than that. She deserved a moment of genuine recognition, untainted by ulterior motives or societal expectations. But how could Sophia ensure that? How could she make this about Maria and not about herself? The doubt gnawed at her, turning over and over in her mind until it felt like a weight she couldn't lift. And then there was Maria herself, the person at the heart of it all. Sophia thought about the way Maria had looked at her when she first insisted she attend the wedding. Maria had smiled, hesitant but warm, her hands twisting nervously as she said, "Are you sure? I don't want to be a distraction." Those words echoed in Sophia's mind now, filling her with an ache she couldn't describe. Maria had spent her entire life in the background, quietly supporting others without ever asking for anything in return. The last thing Sophia wanted was to make her feel uncomfortable or exposed. What if this moment, meant to honor her, only made her feel out of place? What if Maria didn't want the spotlight, didn't want the world to see her sacrifices laid bare? Sophia felt a wave of guilt as she realized she had never asked Maria how she felt about all of this. She had assumed, perhaps selfishly, that this was what Maria deserved, but had she ever stopped to consider what Maria truly wanted? The doubts compounded, spiraling into an endless loop that left Sophia feeling more uncertain than ever. For every reason to move forward with her plan, there seemed to be an equally compelling reason to hold back. She thought about the speeches she had prepared, the words she had practiced in front of the mirror, and suddenly, they felt hollow. What if she stumbled? What if she couldn't find the right words in the moment? What if the weight of her emotions made her voice tremble, and the message she wanted to convey was lost? Sophia had always been confident in her ability to communicate, but this wasn't a boardroom or a business pitch. This was her heart laid bare, her gratitude and vulnerability exposed for everyone to see. The stakes felt impossibly high, and for the first time, Sophia wondered if she was brave enough to face them. As the clock inched closer to the ceremony, Sophia felt the walls of the bridal suite closing in around her. She stood and paced the room, her gown trailing softly behind her, her mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. She tried to imagine the ceremony without the moment she had planned for Maria, tried to picture herself saying her vows, moving through the day without acknowledging the person who had given her so much. The image felt hollow, incomplete, like a story with its most important chapter missing. But the alternative, standing in front of that crowd, baring her soul and risking misunderstanding, judgment, or failure, felt equally daunting. For the first time in years, Sophia felt small, unsure, and entirely human. And yet, even in the depths of her doubt, there was a small, steady voice within her that refused to be silenced. It reminded her of why she had planned this moment in the first place, of the promise she had made to herself to honor Maria in a way that truly mattered. It reminded her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Sophia didn't feel ready, didn't feel certain, but as the knock came on the door signaling it was time to begin, she knew she had to make a decision. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, and looked at herself in the mirror. This wasn't about perfection, about meeting expectations, or about preserving an image. This was about gratitude, about love, about doing what was right, even when it was hard. And with that thought, Sophia steadied herself, ready to face whatever came next, doubts and all. The morning of Sophia's wedding arrived with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The grand estate was already buzzing with activity, florists adjusting towering arrangements, caterers setting pristine tables, and staff moving with practiced precision to ensure every detail was flawless. Yet, within the quiet confines of the bridal suite, Sophia sat alone for a moment, her gaze fixed on the golden light filtering through the lace curtains. This day was meant to be the pinnacle of her success, a celebration of love and triumph, a chapter in her life that seemed almost unreal in its perfection. And yet, as the weight of the day settled on her shoulders, she felt the gravity of what lay ahead, not just the ceremony, not just the vows, but the moment she had been building toward, the one that would transform this day from a lavish event into something profoundly meaningful. Downstairs, the guests began to arrive, their laughter and conversations filling the air with an energy that was both festive and refined. The estate itself was a vision of elegance, every corner meticulously curated to reflect the grandeur of the occasion. The entrance hall sparkled with cascading chandeliers, their crystals catching the morning sunlight, while the ballroom was transformed into a dreamscape of blush and ivory tones. Tables were draped in fine linens, adorned with arrangements of roses and peonies, their fragrance mingling with the soft strains of live music from the string quartet. Guests, dressed in their finest, moved effortlessly through the space, sipping champagne and exchanging polite greetings. It was the kind of scene that could have been lifted from a magazine, a moment suspended in time, where everything seemed perfect. Sophia's family arrived quietly, their awe evident as they took in the splendor around them. Her mother clutched her father's arm, her eyes wide with disbelief as she whispered, "I never imagined something like this for our Sophia." Her father nodded, his own expression a mix of pride and wonder. They felt out of place, of course. They always did in settings like this, but their love for their daughter outweighed any discomfort. Sophia had ensured they were treated with the utmost care, seating them among family friends who would make them feel welcome. Even so, her parents exchanged small, nervous smiles, knowing their presence here was as much a testament to their daughter's achievements as it was a reflection of their own quiet sacrifices. In the far corner of the hall, Maria arrived early, slipping in unnoticed as she had always done in every part of her life. Her dress, a gift from Sophia, was simple but elegant, chosen with care to ensure Maria felt comfortable without drawing too much attention. She moved cautiously through the space, her eyes darting to the grandeur around her, her hands clutching a small purse as if it might anchor her amidst the overwhelming scene. Maria had spent decades in homes like this, though always in the background, cleaning and organizing, ensuring everything ran smoothly without ever being part of the celebrations. Today was different, and the unfamiliarity of it left her unsure. She found a seat near the back, hoping to remain invisible, her heart swelling with pride as she imagined Sophia walking down the aisle, radiant and happy. Yet there was a part of her that felt out of place, a small voice whispering that she didn't belong among such wealth and opulence. As the guests settled into their seats, the ceremony began to unfold with a rhythm that felt almost choreographed. The music swelled, signaling the procession, and all heads turned to watch as the bridal party made their way down the aisle. The bridesmaids moved gracefully, their dresses shimmering softly under the light, each carrying a small bouquet that complemented the lush floral arrangements lining the aisle. Finally, the moment arrived. The doors at the back of the hall opened and Sophie appeared, her arm linked with her father's, her gown trailing behind her like a river of silk. The collective gasp from the audience was almost audible as they took in the sight of her, poised, elegant, and utterly luminous. As Sophia made her way down the aisle, her gaze swept over the crowd, pausing briefly on her parents, whose faces glowed with pride, and then on Maria, who sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in that instant, Sophia felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. This wasn't just a wedding. This was the culmination of everything. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and triumph that had led her to this point. Maria's presence grounded her, reminded her of the promises she had made to herself to honor those who had shaped her journey. The ceremony unfolded with all the grace and beauty one might expect. Vows were exchanged, heartfelt and sincere, as Sophia and Daniel pledged their lives to one another. Laughter rippled through the crowd at moments of humor, and tears fell freely during the more tender passages. But as the officiant began to conclude, signaling the moment that would mark the official start of their union, Sophia felt her heart quicken. She raised her hand slightly, a signal to pause, and turned to face the crowd. "Before we continue," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "there's something I need to say." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience as Sophia stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Maria. "Today is one of the most important days of my life," she continued, "but it wouldn't feel complete if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge someone who has been my guiding light, my strength, and my greatest supporter." She paused, her voice catching slightly as she smiled warmly at Maria. "Maria, would you please stand?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward the back, where Maria sat frozen, her cheeks flushed with shock. Slowly she rose, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. The guests exchanged glances, some curious, others confused as they tried to place her. Who was this woman, and why was she being singled out on a day like this? But as Sophie began to speak, the confusion melted away, replaced by a quiet awe as she shared Maria's story. A story of sacrifice, of love, and of unwavering loyalty that had shaped Sophia's life in ways no one had known until now. "Maria isn't just someone who worked for my family," Sophie said, her voice strong and clear. "She's the person who believed in me when no one else did, who sacrificed so I could have opportunities, who made me feel like I mattered even when the world tried to tell me I didn't. She is the reason I stand here today, and I owe her more than I can ever put into words." As Sophia's words filled the room, Maria's eyes brimmed with tears, her expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. The guests, too, seemed deeply moved, some dabbing their eyes with tissues, others nodding quietly as they absorbed the depth of Sophia's gratitude. For a moment, the grandeur of the wedding faded into the background, replaced by something far more profound, a recognition of the quiet, unseen heroism that had made it all possible. Sophia stepped toward Maria, holding out a small box. "This," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "is for you." Maria's hands shook as she opened the box, revealing a set of keys. "It's a home," Sophia explained, her smile breaking through her tears. "A place that's yours, where you can finally rest, where you can live the life you deserve." The room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that seemed to echo endlessly as Maria stood there, overwhelmed and speechless. And in that moment, the wedding became something greater than anyone had expected. A celebration not just of love, but of gratitude, of the bonds that carry us through life, and of the extraordinary strength it takes to give so much and ask for nothing in return. As the ceremony unfolded with breathtaking precision and elegance, Sophia found herself swept up in a tide of emotions that she could barely contain. She stood at the center of it all, the sparkling chandeliers casting a soft glow over the sea of guests, the hushed whispers of admiration as they took in every detail of the event. But her mind was far from the surface glamour. With every passing moment, her thoughts turned inward to the journey that had brought her here, to the people who had shaped her life, and to the woman seated quietly at the back of the room who had given more to Sophia than anyone else ever had. It wasn't just the grandiosity of the day that stirred her reflections. It was the realization that in all this luxury, in all this celebration of love, there was a thread of deeper meaning that she had to honor. For Sophia, the wedding was more than a milestone. It was a mirror, reflecting not just the life she had built but the sacrifices that had paved the way. Sophia thought back to her childhood, to a small, weathered house that always seemed too quiet despite the noise of her parents' struggles. Her father's exhaustion, her mother's worry, the weight of poverty that pressed down on every corner of their lives. It all felt so distant now, yet so vivid in her memory. And in the middle of that life, there had been Maria, a constant presence who made the impossible seem bearable. Maria had been more than a maid. She had been a guide, a protector, a silent architect of the dreams Sophia dared to chase. Every warm meal Maria prepared, every word of encouragement she whispered, every sacrifice she made without complaint, they all came rushing back to Sophia as she stood in her gown, surrounded by a world that might never understand what Maria meant to her. The crowd's attention was on her now, their eyes filled with admiration, some even with envy, as they watched her radiant confidence and poise. But Sophia felt a dissonance she couldn't shake. They saw the success, the wealth, the polished exterior, but they didn't see the foundation beneath it all. They didn't see the nights when Maria had stayed up late sewing her clothes so she could walk into school with a sense of dignity. They didn't see the times Maria gave up her own meals so Sophia could eat, or the moments when Maria shielded her from the harsh realities of a world that didn't seem to care. Those memories were etched into Sophia's heart, as clear as the day they happened, and the weight of them pressed against her now, filling her with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. And yet, alongside that gratitude, there was guilt, a quiet, gnawing feeling that she hadn't done enough to repay Maria, to acknowledge the enormity of what she had given. Yes, she had tried in small ways over the years, raising Maria's wages, ensuring she was cared for, treating her with kindness and respect. But in the back of her mind, Sophia always felt that it wasn't enough. How could it be? How could she ever repay someone who had given her a childhood filled with love and hope, even when the world outside their door offered nothing but hardship? The thought of Maria sitting at the back of the room, unnoticed by most, stirred a deep ache in Sophia's chest. It wasn't right. Maria deserved more than a quiet corner. She deserved to be seen, to be celebrated, to have her story told in a way that would make people understand just how extraordinary she was. As Sophia reflected, she couldn't ignore the tension between her personal desire to honor Maria and the societal expectations surrounding the day. This was a wedding, after all, a day meant to focus on the couple, on their love, on the future they were building together. Would people see her decision to spotlight Maria as a distraction, an unnecessary deviation from the script of perfection they had come to expect? Would they judge her for shifting the attention away from herself and Daniel, even for a moment? Sophia wrestled with these questions, her heart pulling her in one direction even as her mind presented all the reasons to hesitate. She thought of Daniel's family, of the world they came from, a world of polished manners and unspoken hierarchies where appearances mattered as much as intentions. How would they react to this? Would they understand, or would they see it as a breach of decorum? A disruption of the carefully curated image they had worked so hard to maintain. But even as the doubt lingered, Sophia felt a growing clarity within her. This wasn't about appearances or expectations. It wasn't about following a script or meeting the unspoken standards of a world that often valued image over authenticity. This was about gratitude, about love, about doing the right thing even when it was uncomfortable. Maria had spent her life giving without asking for anything in return. She had carried the weight of Sophia's dreams, her struggles, her triumphs, without ever seeking recognition. How could Sophia let this day pass without acknowledging that? How could she stand in front of this crowd, pledging herself to a new life, without first honoring the person who had made it all possible? As these thoughts swirled within her, Sophia found herself overwhelmed by emotion. She thought of Maria's hands, worn and calloused from years of labor, yet always gentle when they rested on Sophia's shoulder in quiet reassurance. She thought of Maria's voice, steady and kind, even when life was anything but. She thought of the way Maria had smiled through her own struggles, putting Sophia's needs before her own without hesitation. And she thought of the courage it must have taken for Maria to leave her own home, her own family, to care for another. It was a courage that Sophia could barely fathom, a strength that she knew she had drawn upon countless times without even realizing it. Sophia knew now, as she stood in the glow of the moment, that her gratitude for Maria couldn't remain silent. This day wasn't just about celebrating her love for Daniel. It was about celebrating the love that had carried her through every trial, every hardship, every triumph. It was about showing the world that success isn't built in isolation, that behind every person who rises, there are others who lift them. Maria was that person for Sophia, and it was time the world knew it. As the ceremony reached its final moments and the officiant prepared to close the book on this chapter, Sophia felt a calm determination settle over her. This wasn't just a gesture, it was a truth she needed to share, a way of honoring a bond that had shaped her life in ways words could scarcely capture. Sophia took a deep breath, her heart steady now as she prepared to speak. The doubts that had haunted her moments earlier began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt undeniable. She knew there would be whispers, perhaps even disapproval, but she also knew that this moment wasn't about pleasing the crowd. It was about acknowledging the woman who had given her so much, the woman who deserved to be seen, to be celebrated, to be loved as deeply and as openly as she had loved. And with that thought, Sophia stepped forward, ready to turn the spotlight onto Maria, ready to share the story that had been waiting to be told, ready to honor the invisible thread of love and sacrifice that had carried her here. As the minutes ticked closer to the ceremony, the grand hall buzzed with an air of expectation that was almost tangible. Guests continued to filter in, their voices hushed but filled with curiosity as they admired the opulence around them. The chandeliers, each a masterpiece of crystal artistry, cast a warm glow over the room, their light reflecting off the polished marble floors. The floral arrangements, an explosion of roses, peonies, and cascading orchids, filled the air with their intoxicating fragrance. It was a scene so picture-perfect that it seemed almost unreal, a world where every detail spoke of elegance and control. Yet beneath this polished surface, Sophia's mind churned with an intensity that belied her composed exterior. She sat in the bridal suite, her heart pounding, her hands clutching the edge of her chair as a mix of excitement and trepidation coursed through her veins. She had a plan, a moment she had envisioned countless times, but as the reality of the day unfolded, the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her like never before. Downstairs, the orchestra began to tune their instruments, the soft hum of violins and cellos weaving into the murmurs of the crowd. Sophia imagined the guests settling into their seats, their conversations shifting from small talk to speculation about the ceremony ahead. What would her gown look like? How lavish would the decorations be? These were the questions on their minds, the details that mattered to a room filled with people accustomed to judging the worth of an event by its surface. But Sophia knew that what she was about to do would change the narrative entirely. It wouldn't be about the flowers or the music or even the vows. It would be about something deeper, something that would ripple through the room and leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. And that thought, as thrilling as it was, filled her with a nervous energy she could barely contain. Maria was already seated in the hall, her presence unassuming but impossible for Sophia to ignore. She pictured her there, sitting quietly near the back, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze lowered in that familiar way that spoke of humility and deference. Maria had always been this way, gentle, kind, and so accustomed to blending into the background that most people barely noticed her. But Sophia noticed. She always had. And now, as she prepared to turn the spotlight onto Maria in a room filled with the most influential people she had ever encountered, she felt a pang of doubt twist in her chest. Would they understand? Would they see Maria the way she did, as the cornerstone of her success, the quiet hero who had shaped her life in ways that couldn't be measured? Or would they dismiss her as an afterthought, a name mentioned in passing, unworthy of the attention Sophia was about to give her? The thought of those judgmental eyes, those whispered conversations, sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. She could almost hear the murmurs now. Why is she doing this? Why draw attention away from the ceremony? The risk of misunderstanding felt enormous, a gamble that could either elevate the day into something unforgettable or cast a shadow over the perfection she had worked so hard to achieve. And yet, as much as the fear of judgment gnawed at her, it wasn't enough to deter her. Deep down, Sophia knew this moment wasn't about the guests or their opinions. It was about Maria. It was about gratitude. It was about doing something that felt right, no matter how unconventional it might seem. The knock on the door startled her, breaking the loop of thoughts spinning in her mind. "It's time," said the coordinator, her voice gentle but firm. Sophia stood, her gown cascading around her like liquid silk, and took a deep breath. She glanced at herself in the mirror one last time, her reflection both familiar and foreign. The woman staring back at her was polished, poised, every inch the bride the world expected her to be. But beneath the flawless exterior was a heart racing with anticipation, with the weight of what was about to unfold. As she walked out of the suite and into the hallway, the soft rustle of her gown against the floor the only sound, she felt the suspense building, each step bringing her closer to the moment she had been planning for months. The procession began, each member of the bridal party moving with measured grace down the aisle. The music swelled, its melody delicate yet commanding, setting the tone for what was to come. Sophia waited at the grand doors, her arm linked with her father's, her pulse quickening as the moment drew near. The doors opened, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd as she appeared, radiant and composed. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, her smile warm but reserved. The guests watched her with rapt attention, their whispers silenced, their eyes fixed on her every step. But Sophia's focus wasn't on them. It was on Maria, seated at the back, her presence grounding her in a way nothing else could. As Sophia approached the altar, she felt the tension in the room shift. The vows were exchanged, each word carrying the weight of promise and commitment, and the crowd responded with soft sighs and smiles. It was beautiful, as perfect as anyone could have hoped for. But as the officiant prepared to close the ceremony, Sophia raised her hand slightly, signaling for him to pause. A murmur of confusion spread through the crowd, their curiosity piqued as they waited to see what would happen next. Sophia turned to face the room, her voice steady but filled with emotion as she said, "Before we conclude, there's something I need to say." The suspense in the room was palpable now, the air thick with anticipation. Sophia could feel the weight of every gaze, the silence so complete that even the faint rustle of fabric seemed loud. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Maria. "There's someone here today who has been the foundation of my life," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Someone whose love and sacrifices have made everything you see here possible. Maria, will you please stand?" The gasp that followed was almost audible as the crowd turned to look at Maria, who froze in her seat, her eyes wide with shock. Slowly, hesitantly, she rose, her hands trembling as she clasped them in front of her. The room was silent, every guest hanging on Sophia's next words, their curiosity mingled with the realization that they were about to witness something extraordinary. And in that moment, as the spotlight shifted from the bride to the humble woman at the back of the room, the suspense reached its peak, setting the stage for a moment that would resonate far beyond the walls of the grand hall. As the room fell into a profound silence, Sophia stood at the altar, her gaze steady but her heart pounding as she prepared to speak. The audience, stunned by her unexpected pause, leaned in with anticipation. It wasn't just curiosity that held them, it was the realization that something unusual, something extraordinary, was about to unfold. Sophia turned slightly, her eyes locking onto Maria, who stood nervously at the back of the hall, her hands trembling, her face a mixture of shock and uncertainty. Maria's presence in the room was no longer invisible, no longer something the guests could ignore. With every ounce of emotion coursing through her, Sophia knew that this moment, the one she had agonized over, prepared for, and doubted, was now hers to claim. She stepped forward, her voice soft but clear, the strength in her words drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Today is one of the most important days of my life," Sophia began, her tone steady but carrying the weight of deep emotion. "But it wouldn't feel complete if I didn't take a moment to honor someone who has been my guiding light, my strength, and the reason I am standing here before you today." Her words hung in the air, the room so quiet that it seemed even the chandeliers stopped shimmering, as if the very space itself was listening. "Maria," Sophia continued, her voice breaking slightly as she gestured toward the back of the hall, "would you please stand?" The guests turned, their gazes fixed on Maria, who hesitated before slowly rising from her chair. Her hands clutched the edges of her dress as if to steady herself, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and discomfort. The quiet murmurs that had started to ripple through the crowd now ceased entirely, replaced by an almost palpable sense of curiosity. Who was this woman, they wondered, and why was the bride drawing attention to her in such a public and heartfelt way? But as Sophia began to speak again, those questions faded into the background, replaced by the power of the story she was about to tell. "Maria has been with my family since I was a little girl," Sophia said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "She came into our lives during a time of struggle, when hope seemed like a luxury we couldn't afford. But Maria didn't just work for us, she cared for us. She believed in us when we struggled to believe in ourselves. And she believed in me." Sophia paused, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she turned to Maria. "Maria, you didn't just clean our home or cook our meals. You became my rock, my second mother, my greatest supporter. You gave me the strength to dream, to fight for a better future, and to become the woman I am today." The room was utterly still, every face turned towards Sophia as she continued. "There were times when my family couldn't make ends meet, but you found a way to make us feel whole. You sacrificed so much, never asking for anything in return. You gave me your time, your care, your unwavering belief that I could rise above the circumstances we faced. And because of you, I did." Sophia's voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on, her words carrying the kind of authenticity that couldn't be rehearsed. "Maria, without you, there would be no Sophia standing here today. There would be no success, no triumph, no celebration. You didn't just shape my life, you saved it." The guests, many of whom had come expecting a display of grandeur and wealth, were now visibly moved. Some dabbed at their eyes with tissues, while others exchanged glances that spoke of a shared understanding of the depth of what they were witnessing. Even those who had initially judged Maria's presence now saw her through a different lens, not as a maid, but as a woman whose quiet heroism had transformed a life. Sophia wasn't finished. She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Maria, and reached for a small box held by one of the attendants. "Maria," she said, her voice trembling with emotion as she opened the box to reveal a set of keys. "This is for you. It's a home, a place where you can finally rest, where you can live the life you deserve. It's a small way of saying thank you, though it will never match the love and sacrifices you have given me." Maria's hands shook as Sophia placed the box in them, her eyes filling with tears that spilled freely down her cheeks. For a moment, she was speechless, her gaze fixed on Sophia, as if trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with raw emotion, "Thank you, Sophia. I don't deserve this." Sophia shook her head, her own tears falling now. "You deserve this and so much more. You've given me everything, Maria, and today, I want the world to know how much you mean to me." The room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that echoed through the hall, the sound filling every corner with its power. Guests rose to their feet, their clapping a testament to the moment they had just witnessed. A moment that transcended wealth, status, and appearances, a moment that celebrated the extraordinary love and strength of one woman who had given so much and asked for nothing in return. As Maria and Sophia embraced, the energy in the room shifted. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a testament to the power of gratitude, the importance of recognizing those who make a difference in our lives, and the strength it takes to stand up and say, "I see you. I honor you. You matter." The guests, many of whom had arrived expecting a celebration of love between two people, left with something far greater, a reminder of the invisible threads of humanity that connect us all. And for Sophia, as she looked out at the faces of her family, her friends, and the woman who had shaped her life, she knew that this moment was more than she could have ever hoped for. It was a triumph, not just of love, but of truth. As the applause began to fade, the energy in the room shifted into a hushed anticipation. Every eye now focused on Sophia and Maria. It wasn't just admiration or curiosity that filled the air. It was a profound recognition of the significance of what was unfolding before them. Sophia turned toward the attendant standing quietly at the side of the stage and took the small velvet box into her trembling hands. The moment felt surreal, as though time had slowed, every heartbeat and breath magnified. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but clear, as she began to speak. "Maria," she said, her gaze steady and filled with emotion, "you've given me more than I could ever repay. You gave me your time, your love, and your unwavering belief in me when I couldn't find it in myself. And today, I want to give you something that reflects just a fraction of the gratitude I carry in my heart for you." She held the box carefully, her fingers brushing over its smooth surface as she stepped closer to Maria. The room was utterly silent, every guest leaning forward slightly as though afraid to miss a single word. Sophia's voice softened as she continued, "This is not just a gift, it's a promise. A promise that your sacrifices, your love, and your presence in my life will never go unnoticed or unappreciated." Her hands opened the box slowly, revealing a gleaming set of keys nestled within the dark velvet lining. The simplicity of the gesture belied the enormity of its meaning, and the audience collectively inhaled, their astonishment palpable. Maria's eyes widened, her gaze fixed on the keys as though they were something she couldn't quite comprehend. Her hands fluttered to her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips as tears filled her eyes. "This," Sophia said, her voice breaking slightly, "is your home. A place that is entirely yours, a place where you can rest, where you can find comfort and joy, where you can live without the burden of giving everything to others while asking for nothing in return." The applause that had started to build earlier now erupted once again, but Sophia barely heard it. Her focus was entirely on Maria, whose trembling hands reached out to take the box as though it were the most fragile and precious thing she had ever held. Tears streamed down Maria's cheeks, her expression a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and overwhelming emotion. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, her voice lost amidst the enormity of the moment. Sophia stepped closer, her own tears falling freely now, as she placed a comforting hand on Maria's shoulder. "You deserve this and so much more," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You've spent your entire life giving to others, building lives that weren't your own, and today, I want to give something back to you. This is just the beginning, Maria. A way for you to finally have a space that is yours, a life that is yours. A place where you can dream, rest, and live the way you've made possible for so many others, including me." The crowd, now entirely on their feet, erupted into applause once more, their clapping reverberating through the grand hall as though it were an extension of their shared admiration for what they had just witnessed. Many wiped their eyes, moved by the sheer humanity of the gesture, while others exchanged looks that spoke of newfound respect, not just for Sophia, but for Maria, whose quiet strength and love had been brought into the light for all to see. Maria, still clutching the box, finally found her voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, her words thick with emotion. "I never imagined. I never thought." She trailed off, her tears flowing too freely to finish her sentence. Sophia smiled gently, her hand still resting on Maria's shoulder. "You don't need to say anything," she said softly. "Your actions, your sacrifices, and your love have already spoken louder than words ever could." For a moment, it felt as though the entire room exhaled together, releasing the tension that had been building throughout the ceremony. What had started as a celebration of Sophia and Daniel's union had transformed into something far greater. a celebration of love in all its forms, of the invisible bonds that tie us to one another, of the courage it takes to recognize and honor those who make our lives possible. Guests who had arrived expecting luxury and spectacle now found themselves deeply moved by the simplicity and authenticity of what they had witnessed. Sophia stepped back slightly, allowing Maria to fully absorb the moment, her own heart swelling with a mixture of relief and joy. She had agonized over this decision, worried about how it might be received, about whether it would be enough to convey everything she felt. But as she looked into Maria's tear-filled eyes, she knew she had done the right thing. This wasn't about grandeur or appearances. It was about truth, about love, about showing the world that success is never achieved alone, and that the people who stand beside us in the shadows deserve to be celebrated in the light. As Maria clutched the keys, her shoulders trembling with the force of her emotions, the crowd began to quiet, their applause tapering into a respectful silence. And in that silence, Maria finally spoke, her voice breaking but filled with unmistakable sincerity. "Thank you, Sophia," she said, her words trembling but clear. "Not just for this, for everything. For seeing me. For remembering me. For making me feel like I mattered." Sophia pulled her into a warm embrace, their connection radiating through the room like a beacon of hope, of gratitude, of humanity. For everyone in attendance, the moment was unforgettable. Not just a key exchange, but a profound reminder of what it means to love and be loved, to give and to receive, to see and to be seen. And for Maria, as she held the box close to her heart, it wasn't just a gift. It was a testament to a life spent in quiet service, finally recognized and honored in the way it deserved to be. For Sophia, it was the culmination of everything she had worked for, not the wealth, not the success, but the chance to give back, to lift up the person who had lifted her, and to ensure that this day would be remembered not just for its beauty, but for its meaning. As Maria's trembling voice faded into the air, the hall fell silent for a fraction of a second, a stillness so profound it seemed as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, like the first rumble of distant thunder, a single pair of hands began to clap. The sound was crisp and deliberate, breaking through the quiet like a spark igniting dry timber. It was followed almost instantly by another, then another, until the applause swelled into a crescendo so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundation of the grand estate. The guests, many of whom had arrived expecting nothing more than an opulent wedding, now stood as one, their clapping a resounding tribute to the moment they had just witnessed. It wasn't the polite, reserved applause of a formal event. It was raw, heartfelt, and impossibly human, a collective expression of awe, respect, and emotion that rippled through the room in waves. Sophia stood beside Maria, her heart pounding as she looked out at the crowd. The faces that had once seemed detached and composed were now transformed, their expressions a mixture of admiration, wonder, and unguarded emotion. Some clapped with fervor, their hands moving almost instinctively, while others dabbed at their eyes with tissues, their applause slowed only by the tears they couldn't hold back. Even those who had arrived skeptical or indifferent found themselves swept up in the moment, their hands joining the rhythm of gratitude and reverence that filled the room. For a space that had been designed to showcase perfection and grandeur, this applause was something else entirely. It was messy, unfiltered, and alive, carrying with it the full weight of the emotions that had been stirred. Maria stood frozen at first, her hands clutching the small box of keys as though it were her lifeline. Her wide eyes darted from face to face, her disbelief evident in every trembling movement. This was a woman who had spent her entire life in the background, unnoticed and unacknowledged, her presence always quiet, her contributions never celebrated. And now, here she was, standing in the center of a room filled with some of the most powerful and influential people, their applause thundering around her like a storm. Tears streamed down her cheeks, unchecked and unashamed, as the reality of the moment began to sink in. She had never imagined this, never dared to dream that her sacrifices, her love, her work would be seen, let alone honored in such a profound way. Sophia turned to Maria, her own eyes glistening as she placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They see you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the clapping. "They finally see you." Maria looked at her, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but none came. Instead, she simply nodded, her tears continuing to flow as she turned back to face the crowd. She saw smiles, nods, and faces filled with admiration. For the first time in her life, Maria felt truly seen, not as a servant, not as a helper, but as a human being whose quiet strength and love had left an indelible mark on the world. The applause didn't wane, it grew louder, deeper, as though the crowd understood that this moment wasn't just about Maria. It was about something much larger. It was about the invisible threads that connect us all. The people whose contributions often go unnoticed, the unsung heroes who make the world a better place through their quiet acts of service and love. In celebrating Maria, they were celebrating every person like her, every story that had gone untold, every sacrifice that had been made without recognition. Even Daniel's family, who had initially approached the day with a sense of formality and distance, now stood with tears in their eyes, their applause as genuine and heartfelt as anyone else's. Daniel's mother, a woman who had spent her life mastering the art of composed grace, wiped her tears with a handkerchief, her face softened by a newfound understanding of Sophia and the life she had come from. Daniel himself looked at Sophia with a mixture of pride and admiration, his love for her deepened by the courage and authenticity she had shown. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Sophia glanced at him, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange that spoke of gratitude, love, and the shared knowledge that this day had become something far greater than either of them had imagined. As the applause continued, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The doubts that had plagued her in the days leading up to the wedding, the fear of judgment, the worry that her gesture might be misunderstood, were now entirely absent. In their place was a quiet certainty that she had done the right thing. This wasn't about perfection or appearances. It was about truth. It was about showing the world what love looked like, not just romantic love, but the kind of love that sacrifices without question, that gives without expecting, that uplifts without needing recognition. Maria, still overwhelmed but now steadier, looked back at Sophia and whispered, "I don't deserve this." Her voice was thick with emotion, her words barely audible, but Sophia heard them as clearly as if they had been shouted. She shook her head, her smile gentle but firm. "You deserve this and so much more," she replied. "This is just the beginning, Maria. Today the world sees you the way I've always seen you, as extraordinary." And with that, the applause began to shift. Guests who had been clapping with fervor now stepped forward, approaching Maria one by one to offer their congratulations, their gratitude, their admiration. Some shook her hand, their eyes filled with tears, while others embraced her warmly, their words flowing with sincerity and respect. Maria, though still overwhelmed, accepted each gesture with grace, her humility shining even in the midst of such overwhelming recognition. The applause lasted far longer than anyone expected, its echoes lingering in the grand hall even after it had faded. But its impact would last even longer, a reminder of the power of gratitude, the importance of seeing and honoring those who make our lives possible. For Maria, it was a moment she would carry with her forever, a validation of a life spent in quiet service that had finally been brought into the light. And for Sophia, it was the culmination of everything she had hoped for. A day that wasn't just about love, but about truth, about humanity, and about the bonds that make us who we are. As the final notes of the applause faded and the room settled into a reflective silence, the weight of the moment lingered like a quiet melody that refused to end. Sophia stood by Maria's side, their connection unspoken but palpable, a bond built not just on gratitude but on love, resilience, and the invisible threads of humanity that tie us all together. The day had begun as a celebration of love between two people, but it had transformed into something much greater, a testament to the power of kindness, humility, and the enduring impact of one person's selfless acts. Sophia's heart was full, not just from the joy of marrying the man she loved, but from the knowledge that she had finally done what she had always promised herself. She had shown the world what Maria truly meant, not just to her, but to anyone who had ever been lifted by the quiet strength of someone who chose to give without expecting anything in return. As the guests began to drift toward the reception area, their faces still touched with the emotion of what they had witnessed, Sophia found herself reflecting on the themes that had carried her to this moment. Gratitude, she realized, was more than a feeling. It was an action, a choice to recognize and honor the people who shape our lives in ways we often take for granted. Maria's sacrifices, her unwavering belief, her endless love, They were gifts that had not only changed Sophia's life, but had also created a ripple effect that extended far beyond the walls of their home. Because of Maria, Sophia had been able to dream, to rise, to succeed. And now, in honoring Maria, she had passed that ripple forward, inspiring others to see the unseen, to value the uncelebrated, to remember the people whose quiet acts of kindness often go unnoticed. Humility, too, played a central role in this story. Sophia's journey from a modest upbringing to the heights of success was not just about her hard work or determination. It was about the realization that no one achieves anything alone. She had learned that true greatness lies not in wealth or accomplishments, but in the ability to acknowledge the contributions of others, to recognize that our lives are shaped by those who stand with us, often in the background, offering their strength when ours falters. Maria embodied humility in its purest form, a woman who gave everything without seeking recognition, whose love was expressed through actions rather than words. And in honoring Maria, Sophia had not only celebrated her, but had also reminded herself, and everyone in the room, of the beauty and power of humility. Kindness, perhaps the most profound theme of all, wove itself through every part of the day. It was in Maria's hands, worn and calloused from years of work, yet always gentle in their care. It was in Sophia's voice, trembling with emotion as she shared Maria's story with a room full of people who might never have looked twice at her otherwise. It was in the applause of the guests, the recognition of Maria's worth sparking something genuine and human within them. Kindness, as Sophia now understood, was not a grand gesture or a single moment. It was a series of choices, small and large, made over a lifetime, a smile offered, a burden shared, a dream supported. And it was these choices, these acts of kindness, that created the ripples that carried us all forward, connecting us in ways we might never fully comprehend. The ripple effects of this kindness, Sophia realized, were already beginning to show. She could see it in the way the guests looked at Maria now, their expressions soft with admiration and respect. She could feel it in the conversations happening around her, people sharing stories of their own unsung heroes, their own Marias. Even Daniel's family, who had always maintained a quiet distance, now approached Maria with warmth and sincerity, their eyes reflecting a newfound understanding of the depth and complexity of Sophia's journey. And for Maria, who had spent her life in the shadows, this moment of recognition was more than just a gift. It was a validation of everything she had given, a reminder that her life, her love, her work mattered. As Sophia and Daniel moved through the reception, greeting guests and basking in the joy of the day, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of fulfillment. This was more than a wedding. It was a moment of transformation, a celebration not just of love but of humanity itself. She thought about the future, about the life she and Daniel would build together, and she knew that this day would be the foundation of that life, not because of its beauty or grandeur, but because of its truth. It was a day that reminded her, and everyone who witnessed it, that the greatest successes are not the ones we achieve alone, but the ones we share with those who have lifted us, supported us, and believed in us. As the evening drew to a close and the stars began to shimmer in the night sky, Sophia took a quiet moment for herself, stepping outside to breathe in the cool air. She looked up, the vastness of the universe stretching out before her, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Gratitude, humility, kindness, these were the things that truly mattered, the things that defined her life far more than any achievement or accolade ever could. And as she stood there, reflecting on the day and the journey that had brought her to this moment, she made a silent vow to carry these lessons forward, to continue honoring the people who shaped her, to keep creating ripples of love and kindness that would extend far beyond her own life. For Maria, the day marked a turning point, a moment of recognition that would stay with her forever. She would return to her new home, a place that was finally hers, carrying not just the keys, but the knowledge that her life, her sacrifices, her love had made an impact. And for everyone who witnessed that moment, the ripple effect of Sophia's gratitude and Maria's strength would continue to spread, inspiring them to look closer, to appreciate more deeply, and to honor the people who make their own lives possible. And so, as the lights dimmed and the laughter of the guests faded into the night, the legacy of that day remained, a reminder that in a world often consumed by appearances and achievements, the greatest moments are those that reflect the best of what it means to be human, to love, to give, and to see one another for who we truly are. As the last of the guests filtered out into the cool evening, their laughter and soft voices fading into the distance, Sophia stood at the edge of the grand hall, her hand resting lightly on the back of a chair as she gazed over the now quiet space. The once bustling room, with its glittering chandeliers and lavish decor, now held a different kind of energy, a stillness that felt profound, almost sacred. The events of the day swirled in her mind, not as individual moments but as a tapestry woven together by a single, undeniable truth. Everything she had, everything she was, had been built on the foundation of love, sacrifice, and the quiet, invisible strength of someone who had always been there, just beyond the spotlight. She thought of Maria, now seated in a corner with her hands resting gently on the box containing the keys to her new home, her face still glowing with the disbelief and gratitude of the day's events. For Sophia, the weight of what had transpired felt like both a release and a beginning, a moment that would ripple forward into every choice she made from this day on. As Sophia stood there, she reflected on the extraordinary simplicity of Maria's presence in her life. Maria had never sought recognition or validation. She had never asked for anything, never demanded acknowledgement for the countless ways she had shaped Sophia's world. Instead, Maria had lived a life of quiet devotion, pouring her strength into others without expectation, creating a stability that had allowed Sophia to dream, to rise, to succeed. And yet, until today, that strength had gone unseen by so many. In that realization, Sophia felt a pang of guilt but also a surge of purpose. Today wasn't just about correcting an oversight or offering a gesture of thanks. It was about giving voice to a truth that so often goes unspoken. Sometimes the people who seem invisible are the ones holding everything together. This thought, simple yet profound, resonated deeply as Sophia replayed the moments that had led to this day. She remembered the nights when Maria had stayed up late, sewing her school uniforms by hand under the dim light of a single bulb. She remembered the mornings when Maria, despite her unweariness, had prepared meals with care, ensuring Sophia left for school with both a full stomach and a full heart. She remembered the moments of quiet reassurance, when Maria's steady hands and calm voice had pulled her through her darkest fears and doubts. These were the moments that had held her world together, moments that had allowed her to flourish in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. And yet Sophia knew that Maria's story wasn't unique. For every Maria in the world, there were countless others. Parents, friends, teachers, mentors, workers, who gave their strength to others without fanfare or acknowledgement, who quietly carried the weight of their loved ones' hopes and dreams. These were the people who made the world move forward, not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through the quiet, unseen work of building lives, of holding others steady, of creating a foundation for greatness. In a society that so often celebrates those who stand in the spotlight, Sophia realized it is the ones who stand in the shadows who truly make greatness possible. Sophia's thoughts drifted to the faces of her guests, their expressions still fresh in her memory. She had seen their surprise, their awe, their transformation as they listened to Maria's story. Many of them had come expecting a display of opulence, a celebration of wealth and success. But they had left with something far more meaningful, a recognition of the invisible forces that shape our lives, a reminder of the quiet heroes who often go unnoticed. She thought of the conversation she had overheard throughout the evening, guests sharing stories of their own, Maria's, the people in their lives who had given selflessly, who had held them together without asking for anything in return. These ripples, Sophia knew, were just the beginning. Today was about Maria, but it was also about everyone like her, about honoring the invisible and making their contributions visible to the world. Maria, still seated quietly, seemed lost in thought, her hands running gently over the box as if trying to convince herself it was real. Sophia walked over, her footsteps soft against the polished floor, and sat beside her. For a moment, they said nothing, the silence between them filled with an unspoken understanding. Finally, Maria looked up, her eyes glistening. "I never thought anyone would see me," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I never thought someone like me could matter this much." Sophia reached over, taking Maria's hand in hers, her grip firm but gentle. "You've always mattered, Maria," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just to me, but to everyone whose lives you've touched. You've been the thread holding us all together, even when we didn't see it, and today the world finally knows." Maria nodded, her tears falling freely now, but her expression was one of peace. For the first time, she felt the weight of her life's work lifted, not erased, but acknowledged, validated, celebrated. And for Sophia, that was the greatest gift of all. The knowledge that she had finally given Maria a piece of the love and strength she had received for so many years. It wasn't just about the keys, the house, or the applause. It was about saying, "I see you. I honor you. You matter." As the evening wore on and the stars began to emerge in the night sky, Sophia felt a quiet resolve settle within her. This day, this moment wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. A reminder to herself and to everyone who had witnessed it, to look closer, to see the invisible, to honor the people who hold everything together. Because in the end, success isn't measured by what we achieve alone, but by the lives we touch, the gratitude we show, and the love we give back to those who make it all possible. And sometimes, the people who seem invisible are the ones holding everything together. In the weeks following the wedding, Maria's life began to transform in ways she had never imagined, yet ways that felt long overdue. The house Sophia gifted her wasn't just a physical space. It was a sanctuary, a symbol of everything Maria had quietly earned through decades of sacrifice and love. It was a modest home, charming and filled with light, nestled in a quiet neighborhood where the mornings carried the songs of birds and the evenings brought the comforting stillness Maria had never truly known. For the first time in her life, she had a place to call her own, a space where she could breathe deeply, rest without worry, and reflect on the journey that had brought her here. But even as she settled into this new chapter, Maria found that her story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. At first, Maria struggled to adjust to the idea of retirement. She had spent her entire life in service to others, her days shaped by routines that revolved around making life easier for the families she worked for. The idea of slowing down, of focusing on herself, felt foreign, almost indulgent. But as the days passed, Maria began to realize that this chapter of her life wasn't about indulgence. It was about renewal. It was about giving herself the care and attention she had so freely given to others for so many years. Slowly, she began to embrace the idea of rest, of allowing herself the freedom to wake up without a schedule, to spend her mornings sipping tea in her sunlit kitchen, to read the books she had never had time for, and to walk through the small garden behind her house, tending to the flowers and vegetables she had planted with her own hands. But Maria's nature was not one to sit still for long. As the weeks turned into months, she began to think about how she could use her newfound freedom to give back, to pay forward the kindness and love that had brought her to this point. The memories of Sophia's wedding, the applause, the recognition, and the love she felt that day stayed with her, inspiring her to do something meaningful with this new chapter of her life. She thought about the people who, like her, had spent their lives working in the shadows, their contributions often overlooked. She thought about the younger generation of domestic workers, many of whom faced the same struggles she had known, the long hours, the limited opportunities, the feeling of invisibility. And from these reflections, an idea began to take shape. Maria decided to use Sophia's gift, not just the house, but the financial security it provided, to start a small community center for domestic workers. The center, nestled in her neighborhood, became a place where workers could come to rest, to learn, and to connect with one another. Maria used the lessons she had learned throughout her life to guide her efforts. She organized workshops on financial literacy, teaching others how to save and plan for their futures. She brought in speakers to provide advice on workers' rights and resources for those facing challenges in their jobs. And perhaps most importantly, she created a space where people could feel seen, valued, and respected, a place where they could share their stories and know they were not alone. The center quickly became a source of hope and inspiration for many. Maria's humility and warmth drew people in, and her story served as a beacon of what was possible. She didn't see herself as extraordinary, she never had, but to the people who came through her doors, she was a symbol of strength and resilience, proof that even the quietest lives could leave the deepest impacts. Her days, once filled with the routines of serving others, were now filled with purpose of a different kind. She found joy in the smiles of those she helped, in the small victories of those who attended her workshops, in the knowledge that she was creating ripples of change that would extend far beyond her own life. Sophia remained a constant presence in Maria's life, visiting often and supporting her efforts in any way she could. The bond between them, forged over decades of shared struggles and triumphs, only grew stronger. Sofia helped connect Maria's center with larger organizations, amplifying its reach and ensuring it could continue to thrive. But even as the center grew, Maria insisted on keeping it grounded in the values that had shaped her own life: kindness, humility, and an unwavering belief in the power of love and service. For Maria, this chapter of her life was not about seeking recognition or success. It was about honoring the lessons she had learned, about creating a legacy that reflected the values she had carried with her for so long. And for Sofia, watching Maria flourish in this new role was a source of immeasurable joy. She saw in Maria's work the same strength and love that had carried her through her own life, and she knew that the ripple effects of Maria's efforts would continue to spread, touching lives in ways neither of them could fully imagine. Years later, as Maria sat on the porch of her home, her hands resting on her lap, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The applause from Sofia's wedding still echoed in her memory, not as a fleeting moment of recognition, but as a turning point, a moment when she had finally been seen, when her life's work had been honored. And as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting the world in hues of gold and rose, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had been one of service, of quiet love, of sacrifices made without expectation. But now it was also a life of fulfillment, of joy, of giving back in ways that honored the people she had once been and the people she had always believed in. Maria's story, though rooted in humility and service, became a testament to the idea that greatness is not always loud or visible. Sometimes the most extraordinary lives are the ones lived quietly, the ones that hold everything together without seeking the spotlight. And as Maria's legacy continued to grow, touching the lives of so many, she remained the same: humble, kind, and unwavering in her belief that the greatest gift we can give is ourselves. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more inspiring stories like Maria's, and let's continue celebrating the people who make the world a better place. Or keep the inspiration going by watching the next video. It might just change how you see the world.